Hey, it's us, Kat and Toulouse. This is Beyond What's Said, where we explore the hidden dynamics behind communication, confidence, and connection.
Today's all about listening, how to be a better listener, why listening is important. So please make sure you like and subscribe, download the pod, and let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right. Listening, probably the most obvious but most underexplored facet of communication. There's a wonderful stat that I stumbled upon in a paper that I was reading in preparation for the show. It's a 2001 paper, and 50% of our waking lives is spent listening.
50%?
Yeah, 50%. So basically,
Wow.
half of your life is spent listening to other people.
Really? Because it feels like most of the time we're trying to talk and fill silence,
Yeah, it's interesting. There's also a previous 1981 paper that had a similar, figure of 50%.
Huh.
So, but I mean, think about it. On any given day, you are spending a lot of time receiving information from other people and processing it.
I guess we are. Yeah, it's like, we listen to the news, we listen to sounds, we listen to people talk, we eavesdrop into other people's conversations.
Okay. No, it's interesting. I'm thinking of listening here in terms of literally the conversation we're having, you listening to my words and vice versa. But you're right. Listening can also be picking up on the larger environment around you, the sounds, the people, their movements, just the environmental cues around you, right?
Yeah, it's funny because, speaking of listening, so we had a dog. His name is Reggie. Unfortunately, he's already crossed the Rainbow Bridge into, Coco Land. We like to call it Coco Land,
Yep.
as in from the movie Coco.
Great.
And yeah, it's funny because dogs have longer nails. When they walk, there's this click, click, clack, clack kind of sound. This is back when we were in Taiwan, and I had two cats and Reggie. Reggie likes to sneakily go into the litter box and steal cat poop.
Yeah.
And so whenever I hear just sneaky clack, click, clack going into the bathroom, I go, Reggie, and you hear
But eating the poop, that's the objective of the dog.
Yeah.
They do that. I don't know if your dog does that. And please drop a comment if your dog is an active
drop a poop emoji.
Cat poop eater.
Cat
right?
poop eater.
But there's two stories that recently occurred in my life and got me thinking about the power of listening. So the first one is I was at an MUN conference. That's, part of my job. I take high schoolers to MUN conferences a few times a year. So I'm at this American school, and this was the end of the whole conference, and the kids had to sit in to look at a keynote speaker. The keynote speaker was the Polish consul general. So literally the guy that represents the Polish government in the sort of greater Guangzhou area where we're at. And one of my students, she asked him a very basic question, what's the most important takeaway or the most important skill to being an effective diplomat, right? Because he's talking about diplomacy and having worked in different countries and just the art of dealing with people from different cultures and navigating high stakes political situations when they arise.
Yeah.
And he basically said listening.
Wow.
And that was it seemed so basic in the moment. And it's something that I've stumbled upon, not just in this instance with this person from the diplomatic world, but a lot of great books about negotiation, for example, often start with this whole notion of taking the perspective of the other person.
Yeah.
And trying to get into their frame of mind so you can better craft your negotiation around that, right? So I don't know this other person. I don't know their needs, wants, their aspirations, their hopes, their dreams, their fears. And by doing that perspective taking, you might be able to craft a better agreement or at least create a situation where they're more likely to find alignment with you.
That makes sense for diplomats because that is essentially what they do. They go around talking to people, and they can't just come in with their own objectives and intention, be like, this is what I want and I don't care about what you want or your situation. A diplomat is to go and understand and seek some kind of mutual benefit or mutual agreement.
Exactly. No, diplomacy is this art of finding that compromise, finding that common ground, because without it, we resort to the other sort of mechanism we have to resolve disputes on the global stage, which is war and conflict, right? So hearing that, it brought me back to, what I read in the negotiation books that are pretty widespread And hearing that was only really solid confirmation that in order to deal with high stakes meetings or conversations with people that have very clear objectives, we're here to secure, particular trade deal.
Yeah.
We're here to seek clarity about your government's position on a given topic that's important to us. It takes a good amount of pausing and listening. And listening, I think, and this is starting with the end here and getting to what the big takeaway is, but listening, it's not about like immediately solving the problem. A lot of good active listening is about making the other person feel heard
Yeah.
and emotionally secure and validated.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself can actually make the relationship better. And if that relationship is better based on active listening, then yeah, down the road, problems can get solved. So it's not like active listening is immediately like conducive to problem solving. And we'll get to this a little bit later. Problem solving, that can happen sometimes through active listening, but maybe not right away. But in terms of building the relationship of trust and of connection, that's where active listening is important. It's kind of greasing the grooves. It's kind of putting that foundation so that down the road, people feel safe and comfortable sharing information, and then perhaps problems can be solved. So yeah, active listening is not automatically the gateway to solving the problems and getting things done, but it's a starting point.
Yeah, no, definitely. You said something about like pausing earlier. I think a lot of people will be like, well, yeah, I listen and I need to immediately respond.
Yeah.
That's how I show that I'm listening and that I care. But quite frankly, sometimes you need to pause because the act of pausing, it actually does signal to them that you're processing something. You're processing what they just said and you're not reactively trying to immediately provide solution or what
Yes.
you think is best for them.
Yes.
Which I do think that is so important.
So that leads me to the other story that I wanted to bring up, the more personal one. And so, yeah, dealt with some anxiety issues, something I've dealt with largely since 2022. And I finally got around to sitting down with a therapist, sitting down with someone to kind of navigate me through my troubles. And this was recently, last year, I believe. I have only done about 5 or 6 sessions. For now, at least, I feel like I don't need to go any further. But those 6 sessions were super instrumental in getting me to realize that, yeah, I don't need someone to tell me how to navigate this or how to solve the problem.
Well, it's kind of like the classic scenario where the husband and wife, they always say like the wife just wants to be understood.
Mm,
And the husband feels like they're being supportive or doing what
mm,
they need to do by being the provider, the problem solver.
mm,
And so they immediately provide solutions.
yeah.
Each party gets really frustrated with how, no, I just want to be heard. I
Mm,
just want to verbally process what's going on.
mm,
And in the meantime, you're like, yeah, but I'm trying to help you get there
yeah.
faster so I can get back to what I was doing, or you can get back to what you were doing.
And that was my expectation, was literally that the therapist would kind of chime in and provide insights about my thought patterns or would give me strategies and tools to regulate myself. And the therapist did all of the above, but only in these very small doses towards the end of sessions. Most of the work of therapy, at least from my experience, was me sort of sounding out loud what's going on and building this kind of connective tissue in my head around all these experiences and all these things that, had to do with my troubles and my woes. And just by the mere act of talking and elaborating and sounding them out, I really started to see much deeper connections. I was like, oh, wait, the anxiety I felt was more linked to these short-term causes that are recent to, my work or my personal life or whatever. Turns out there's much deeper roots. There are much deeper patterns. And I was able to unravel those threads just by talking.
Well, that's where the craft of a therapist comes in
Mm.
because it's not like they're just sitting there listening and be like, go on,
Yeah, exactly.
and then because like
Please.
which is like a lot of the meme reels would just be like, uh-huh. And then they're like doodling some kind
Yeah.
of comic or making fun of the
Just making
patient.
phallic drawings while
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
talking.
No, it's like because after a while, the patient will be able to feel that you're
Mm,
not present, that
mm,
you're not connected. And so back to like the craft of a therapist, they are actively listening listening, they're
Mm.
processing, and then they act as a guide to be like, okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I heard this part. Let's explore a little bit more into that.
No, totally.
And that sense of guiding, it was able to guide you into thinking, oh, I never paid attention to this part. That was actually worth exploring. And
Yeah.
so then you go into that part and then you go on and then you share a bit more and discover more about yourself, which reminds me of like, I was teaching about this at one of my workshops
Mm.
recently, performance mode versus connection mode.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
I was teaching them that when you're talking to someone and you're listening to their response or whatever it is, having that conversation, if you're in performance mode, then you're not really listening. You're thinking about what should I say next?
Yeah.
And that way
100%.
you're not connected, you're disconnected with them because you're either it's not to say that you're always just trying to one up someone or
Mm.
try to sound smart, but even if it comes from the analogy we used earlier with a husband and wife,
Mm.
that the husband is just trying to fix the situation,
Sure.
then they're thinking, what should I say next that's going to fix that
Yeah.
situation? So it could come from a very good intention.
No,
But
absolutely.
the person is still going to feel very much disconnected and not
Yeah.
understood. But if you're coming from a place of a connection mode, then you're seeking to understand. And when they feel understood, there's this age old saying, it's like people remember not what you say, but how you made them feel.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're talking about connection, and think about the way we understand anything, any problem we need to solve, any task we have to do that is of any kind of complexity. We have to make connections between things
Mm.
before we see the sort of the complete picture. And I think what you're talking about is the word connection, it conjures up image of like, we're connecting,
Look
like
into each other's eyes.
it's like, yeah, there is an element of connection that's possible both verbally and non-verbally. And active listening is about actually feeling like you are on the same wavelength as the person.
Mm.
But I think like building connections, like letting the person explore internally, but also externally while sounding the words out loud to find meaning, to get a sense of what is it that I'm actually trying to articulate here? What's my
Mm.
problem? And what am I trying to get out of this conversation? You talk about the husband and wife duo, and obviously the genders could be reversed here. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But I'm reminded of a lot of my time in grad school, the time I spent sitting in my supervisor's office or any one of my mentors, or even with just fellow graduate students.
Mm.
And we were just talking about our projects,
Mm.
unraveling all these threads and unpacking all these ideas and what we think the dissertation should be and why it should be written like this, why this particular emphasis,
Mm.
why am I leaning on this particular theory as opposed to that particular
Yeah.
theory to kind of structure the end product, right?
But have you ever, encountered where, you're sitting at a round table and you're sharing, your project, they're sharing their project, and you just sense that talking with certain people just becomes a little bit more difficult. Like, but in
Yes.
what? Why? Why is that?
Well, there were moments where I felt I didn't personally experience this with any of my mentors. They were always, again, unconditionally supportive and patient with my
Mm.
ideas and letting me kind of meander and sort of ramble on about
Mm.
stuff. And again, unconditional acceptance. That's a key word here because you're talking about therapy. And
Mm.
one of the older statesmen of positive psychology, humanistic psychology, right? The idea of letting the client unconditionally sound out their feelings, their
Yeah.
thoughts, everything. This was Carl Rogers. He's one
Mm.
of the leading figures of that movement of really developing therapy
Yeah.
as something that allows you to figure things out on your own in a
Mm.
kind of a safe environment.
Yeah.
And I feel like my grad supervisors were doing pseudo-therapeutic work in their
Yeah.
own creation of a space that allowed me to unconditionally test my ideas and take
Mm.
risks. And yeah, sometimes I would ramble on and they're like, okay, well, have you thought about all the ways in which this might be kind of strange and off topic, right? But I did see
What kind
but I did
way?
see other grad students sometimes whether in the seminar room, like meeting in a seminar course, the advisor is immediately quick to, well, no, that's wrong.
Mm.
Or that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You might want to clean that up.
Mm.
And just kind of like abruptly closing off the thought or the thread as it starts to
Well,
unravel.
it's interesting because like as soon as you were embodying, you were simulating that situation.
Mm,
And I was looking at your facial expression as soon as you did, well, no, your eyebrows
mm,
immediately furrowed.
yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't require waiting until your first words to be like, no, this actually doesn't make sense.
Mm,
If someone is, you talk about unconditional acceptance or
mm.
unconditional, what was the word I said?
The exact word is unconditional positive regard.
Right.
Yeah.
Unconditional positive regard is so important to create that kind of safety
Mm,
for people to want to share vulnerably
mm,
and completely what they want to say. Now, if you're sharing and you're on this track and I don't say anything and I go like this,
mm,
you're probably going to be like, "Oh, you don't like it.
mm.
Maybe I don't feel okay to continue on."
Yeah.
And so, I'm not saying you need to like control your
Mm,
face, but that's also a type of cue of are you fully connecting with what they're saying? Are you fully
yes.
listening to what they're saying?
And again, I felt that the facial expression that I responded to the best when I would be in any kind of supervisor's office going on about something, it was like kind of hand in front of the mouth, like,
Like a very pensive look.
and yeah, and it wasn't like excessively furrowed, but it
Yeah.
was usually sort of a neutral
Well,
nodding in
that's different.
agreement. Yeah.
That's different because you have the pensive look, like a thinker, the classic one,
Yeah.
and then you have like, huh, that's actually very encouraging. Even though you're furrowing your brow, you're looking at them,
Mm,
you're
mm,
nodding. There's all these subtle cues that actually becomes this encouragement to
yeah.
the speaker. But then there's this like fa- confusion.
Or like that white cat, two black spots, and it's like, home, that guy,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
the home, the really
the
large cat.
meme,
Yeah, that meme.
or even just like a laugh in an inappropriate time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like maybe you think that, oh, I'm trying to be encouraging, but then it might be in the wrong time, wrong place. And that
Yeah.
comes across as, oh, you're laughing at what I'm saying, or what I'm saying is ridiculous.
Exactly. And I think that while a person is building up the ideas when they're in the infancy stages, or when a person is vulnerable, a spouse or a colleague that's kind of opening up to you,
Mm,
you want to give them that space to
mm,
develop the confidence and security to put the ideas, to put the words out there.
yeah.
So the active listening, it builds that trust, it builds that connection, but it also creates that space where the person can like talk at lengths to figure out what they're trying to get at.
Yeah. And a lot of times, especially if someone's coming to you or I'm coming to you with a problem
Mm,
that I perhaps can't solve and I'm feeling
yeah.
quite frustrated because you have and this is true, like he has learned very quickly to be that kind of supportive spouse for me rather than
Mm,
trying to fix me. He would let me talk and
mm,
let me kind of wander in my thoughts
mm,
and he would just give me that space through the verbal processing. I would then either realize what I didn't realize before,
yeah.
or I would hear what I'm saying and then go, huh. And then he basically didn't do anything, but he actually not only solved my problem,
Mm,
but also made me feel understood.
yeah. And then Lord knows you've done the same thing to me time and time again. This is something we've explored previously. We are our own worst critics. We are sort of permanently living in our frames of mind. And there's a lot of moments where we just don't pause to actually take stock of, well, what is it that I'm really thinking?
Mm,
What is it that is actually, the problem here, the issue? And literally just saying it out loud is enough sometimes to get you further along the path
yeah.
of figuring out the thing. I mean, I've noticed this with students as well.
Mm,
Students have this weird way of coming to me with a problem, whether it's they're stuck writing an essay, they can't quite figure out the wording, and then they verbally process. They just tell me, well, so what I'm trying to say here, and then they'll just unpack their argument in a really kind
mm,
of brilliant and logical way.
yeah.
And then I'm like, that's it. That's literally just write that
That's
down.
right. Mhm.
Um, But I think, to go back to what is active listening, the origins of active listening are pretty interesting. It's a guy by the name of Gordon in the 1970s who pretty much came up with this idea in the context of parent-child communication. And Lord knows, you need to listen to children. There's
well, you should listen.
You should.
Lord knows I don't always listen to them.
But children are a great microcosm of why active listening matters, because so much of their communication, it's not quite there yet. They're lacking the vocabulary or the broad scope of how the world works, right? So they take a lot longer to get to the essential crux of what it is they're trying to say, right?
It's good practice, I guess. Like if you want to practice active listening, go talk to a child and you exercise your patience, because it will take a good 5 to 10 minutes to explain one thing on the most mundane topic in the world.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. It's like we talk about communication and all that stuff, but we are far from perfect. I am far from perfect. A lot of times I'm just like, I don't have time for this.
And it's tough because like it does require like patience, right? And so you have verbal versus nonverbal elements. Now the nonverbal elements are obviously classic things we've talked about, like leaning in, eye contact, and of course you want to create that sense of warmth, that sense of connection, that you're actually not like disengaged or just very
Now, I think over the years, you have learned how I communicate. I don't know what it was like when we first got together. And for me, I'm not used to eye contact. I find it quite uncomfortable. So when you see like online professors or love experts, they say you have to look into your partner's eyes. I'm like, I couldn't think of something more uncomfortable and goofy. And so a lot of times when you talk to me, I would just look like I'm not listening. But then I actually do then recap what you said or give you very strategic feedback or responses, and that signals to you, hopefully, that I was actually listening.
No, of course. And I think that we can read a lot into body language cues. And I think at the level of romantic attraction and relationships, those body cues are everything, like eye contact, touch, and like closeness, right? But I think we don't want to read too much into body cues. We had an encounter with friends of ours, and his wife, she made one of the most hilarious comments about these nonverbal cues.
She was like asking, was like, "Oh, so what do you do? What do you guys talk about in your podcast?" And I was trying to, granted, we were at a party and the kids were like playing Uno quite passionately and quite loud, and we're trying to have a conversation. And so she asked us, "What do we talk about on our podcast?" And I say, "Well, it's communication beyond words. We look at maybe some nonverbal cues. We look at context and so on and so forth." And she happened to lean in like this.
Yeah.
And so I said, just like right now, you're leaning in, signaling that you're interested in what I'm saying. And she just said, she just went, "Oh no, I'm leaning in because I can't really hear you."
Exactly. So do not overthink that sort of nonverbal cues, how to decipher them. Like maybe you can have a good repertoire of, hey, like, if a person has that kind of pensive look, not so furrowed, the body language isn't too distant, like, but I think we shouldn't read too much, into
but
body
that's the thing
language
is
cues
that
sometimes.
everything is, with a grain of salt. It depends on context. It depends on so many things.
Exactly.
And so if you're like, all right, this expert said, these are all the nonverbal cues that you should be aware of. And then you start like looking at every single one of them. Noticing it is a good thing, but then reading too much into it or like taking it personally because of maybe like they did this instead of that. If they do this, then it means this. If you take it too like, at face value, then you're not going to have a good time.
And also, like, for example, I'm crossing my arms right now. You used to say this, like crossing your arms is sort of
it's like a sense of,
I'm closed off.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, no, I enjoy this position. This is a comfortable position, right? So obviously we can have that awareness, but I think the more important skills, the verbal skills, there's two in particular that I think we should emphasize above all else. The first is paraphrasing, and the other is open-ended questions, right?
Well, paraphrasing, much like I said, I may not look like I'm listening to you, but I show that I'm actively listening to you by being able to paraphrase what you just said.
Yeah, exactly.
And we do that with our daughters as well, because we will tell them these instructions or what to do and they'll look like they're not listening, which is fine. But then we'll follow up with a question. Now, can you summarize what we just said?
Mm.
And if they're able to paraphrase, then we're going, all right, good.
Good. Exactly. And it's like recognizing patterns in the other person's speech, right? Like you're actively listening and you want to make sure that there are actual connections being made with these different points, just to make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music. And I think that when the person receives the summary from the listener, if you will, and they're like, okay, well, not only am I being heard, not only is the message clear on my end, but actually now I'm perhaps seeing something different, or I'm seeing patterns or connections in my own ideas that I otherwise wouldn't have seen without this person kind of repackaging the information for me.
Definitely. So, a couple of phrases that I use, and this is something adjacent to what I read in Matt Abrams' book, Think Fast, Talk Smart, where he talks about when you demonstrate active listening through a form of paraphrasing,
Yeah.
you can transition by saying, like, if I'm hearing you correctly, or correct me if I'm wrong, and then you paraphrase what you just heard. And this does like a couple things because, first of all, you are synthesizing what you just heard
Yeah.
so that you can better give a response. And it signals to them that you're listening.
Yeah.
And also, the third thing that, if I may add, is that it gives them a chance to correct you, or like
Yeah.
to add on to that, to
Yeah.
give you a more complete picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, no, it's a wonderful idea. And I think that, for example, if a friend of yours is dumping a lot of the negative events of the day, right? For example, like, hey, I had a terrible encounter with my boss, and then my motorbike or my scooter broke down, or I spilled coffee on my new white shoes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like you don't need to summarize the day's events for the person.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. You had a terrible day, and you're.
So, but you could say like something like, well, it sounds like you got a lot going on your plate these days. Or it could just be like, hey, it sounds like you just had a rough day.
Yeah. That's actually a really good one because I teach this in my workshop as well, which is keyword looping. And so when they share everything that's going on, you have the paraphrase way. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is what I'm hearing. Or you can say, it sounds like, and then you pick whatever keyword that you heard. So maybe
Yeah.
they say, oh, I had a terrible day at work because my boss came down hard on something that I didn't do. Well, it sounds like that was really unfair. Like, could you tell me more? So it sounds like, tell me more. These are all empathetic cues for them to continue to open up and feel, hey, that signals to them, hey, it's safe to share.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you can also even dig deeper into one of the subtopics of said friend's day. Like, hey, so what is it about that encounter with your boss that was particularly stressful or particularly bad, right? Again, a lot of the literature on emotions and how to regulate them and how to process them, it's thinking about them and processing in a way that gets you to break them down in more detail with more granularity, right?
Yeah.
So now we've gone from the general, hey, today was a crappy day, and we're having this more kind of focused conversation around that person's problem point, but you've done nothing other than just ask questions.
You're coming from a place of empathy and kind of like, we're not therapists and we're not trying to be one, but I think just, like lending that ear and providing that guiding question, perhaps being like, oh, that's interesting. Do you want to explore a little bit there? Tell me more about this thing that happened. Or you could say like, well, don't you think that perhaps, and it's coming from a way that is very like kindly suggesting, much like your supervisors gave you, way of being like, hey, perhaps don't you think that that might be a little whatever it is that they said?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, and then this feeds into the asking questions part, being able to paraphrase, summarize, and then eventually coming up with a question that kind of gets the unpacking of the person's problem or feelings further down the road. So yeah, asking open-ended questions. What does that look like?
Asking open-ended questions. Well, that's the thing. It's just like, we always say when you want to continue a meaningful conversation, you don't want to ask questions that generates a yes or no, or like a definite, like one word answer.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't want to be like, so you think your boss is terrible? Yeah. And then that's the end.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have to think of another one. So you had a terrible day? Yeah, I said that already. Okay, next,
Good
get my
point,
cue cards. Like running out of things to say.
It's usually, there's a lot of spontaneity and just organicness, if I could even use that word, to these conversations, right? They have to feel like authentic and real and natural. We're giving you the equivalent to like almost like cue card like responses, but I'm
No,
pretty sure you'll know how to use them.
we're not trying to give them cue card like response. We're trying to say, how do you ask open-ended questions,
Mm,
right? So it's like, so instead of saying that, you could just say something as simple as, tell me more, or how do you feel about that?
mm,
And that provides the space for them to, it's like a blank canvas to be like,
yeah.
hey, here's another canvas, draw on it, create on it.
Exactly. And there's actual science behind active listening as something that, is evidence-based and does enhance the quality of a relationship. But not in the way that people would usually think, actually more in the way that, we've been describing in this podcast episode. So there was a 2015 study by Bodie, Bodie. And essentially what they did is pretty straightforward. They took two groups of students. One group went with trained active listeners
Mm,
who would hear a problem that they were going through. And another group went with untrained, non-active listeners.
mm,
And ultimately, what they found is people who were with the active listeners, there was obviously a higher level of satisfaction, but,
mm,
but the satisfaction wasn't from the fact that a problem had been solved,
mhm,
that there was like utility in the person actively listening. It was more about the emotional support.
mm.
It was more like I was heard and that felt good. And I think that's like a pretty important thing. And it goes back to what we said at the beginning, that just being heard moves the person along, maybe not in the way that completely deals with their issue, but at least it nudges them in the direction where now they feel validated, they feel heard. And what's interesting about that study is, so two particular things that stood out: the active listeners, when they used paraphrasing, that was deemed to be a very positive tactic. Also, reflecting feelings, allowing the person to kind of almost mirror their emotions in the moment of the conversation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the verbal cues were important, and particularly paraphrasing and reflecting feelings. And the value of active listening was more about feeling heard, feeling supported.
So in like the book by Chris Voss, former FBI agent who wrote the book Never Split the Difference, he talks about tactical empathy
Mm,
and also mirroring. Basically, what that does is very much like what you said,
mm,
based on the study that people felt heard because you asked questions, follow-up questions that generated empathy, that showed that you are empathetical
yeah.
and that you are tackling not just what technical term they're saying, but more so what technical feeling are they feeling right now?
Interesting. Wow.
And so they use that tactic as a very effective tool in
Mm.
hostage negotiation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think again, if you're mirroring, if you're allowing the person to feel like they can actually manifest or put this emotion on display in front of you, like that definitely opens you up to a lot more
Yeah.
than just a closed off conversation where things are going to remain at this shallow level.
Mm.
Right. And I think the same can be said about when you're dealing with, because these were strangers in the study,
Yeah.
right, that I'm talking about. And having active listening skills, it's not just about your work colleagues, your spouse, or your supervisor if you're in a PhD program. It's also how you handle new interactions,
Yeah. No, definitely.
strangers or people you meet at gatherings or functions. Um, Being able to mirror those emotional states, especially a person you meet for the first time,
Mm.
it's got to definitely make the person feel like, hey, I can actually get down to ground floor level with this person I
Well,
just met.
that's like, what we call like building rapport.
Mm,
When I was started out my business, my mentor told me you need to, when you meet a prospect, you need to quickly find common ground
yeah,
and then build that rapport with them.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and that requires active listening because they're going to share something and you want to be listening using keyword looping,
Yes.
tactical empathy,
Yes.
and to make them feel like, oh, we have something in common. We
Yeah.
feel similarly about a certain thing. And this isn't to manipulate. And I know that there are a lot of tactics that are being used for the wrong intention. But for us, it's like we want to premise this with we're using it to genuinely understand them
Mm,
so that we can see how we can bring value to them and
yeah.
bring value to us, beneficent, mutual benefit to
Benefit.
both parties.
Also, the questions. the open-ended questions matter.
Yeah.
I think that if you meet a person for the first time, the last thing you want to do is ask a very like, for example, say you meet a plumber,
Mm.
right? It's like,
So you plumb.
yes. Or,
Cool.
or you could be like, so being a plumber is hard, isn't it? And then that's a very like kind of yes, no, type of question. But a great question would be, hey, what's the most blocked toilet you've ever seen? Okay, maybe not that kind of question, but at
That's a
least,
good question though, because like
yeah,
that might generate a lot of really fun stories that you guys will enjoy all the while he's fixing your toilet.
yeah,
And the kind of relationship that you build. In Chinese, there's a saying like 有关系就没关系，没关
mm-mm,
系就有关系.
mm-mm,
In the Chinese culture, it's all about relationships. And it's not
yes,
just exclusive to Chinese cultures. There's a lot of cultures around the
of
world
course, yeah,
that are very relational first.
yeah,
That phrase literally means if you have relationships or connection with a person, then all is well. But if
yes,
you don't have that connection or relationship, then all is not well. When you're actively networking or building these connections, even with a plumber or with a cleaner down the road or
yeah.
whatever, you don't know what kind of stories you're going to hear or like what kind of connections you're going to make from these encounters.
Sometimes it starts with what is the most, the easiest, the hardest, all kind of superlative type words. But it's like, yeah, just getting them to hone in on a particular story,
Yeah.
or a struggle or a challenge. And then you don't know where things kind of unfold from there. One more piece of advice that I have is having good knowledge of current events. I
Hmm.
feel like that's always been a great way to find that connection with someone.
I feel like that's like a pro tip here. So it's like a pro tip to becoming an even better active
Active listener.
listener
Yeah.
is to have an arsenal of awareness or understanding
Yeah.
of different cultures and
Different
global news,
professions.
different professions. I
Yeah.
feel like you do that a lot. I've heard so many times where you've surprised the person because you knew this very unique
Mm.
detail about where they're from or their country or their
Yeah.
politics.
No, I mean, it's for example, if the person is currently, obviously you don't want to immediately go for sensitive topics, but if they are from a country that has a particular political crisis or is undergoing some kind of natural disaster, and then you come to find out that there's family back home, like, hey, is your family okay, what's going on, or what's it like to try and maintain connection with your home country while these developments are happening. Of
Yeah.
course, you need to gauge it to see if this is a sensitive topic you should stay away from. But I think people typically, whenever I have led with that kind of line of questioning, it usually generates a lot of positive affect on the other side, because the
Yeah.
person's like, oh, wait a minute. Like, wait, first of all, about what's going on
Yeah.
in this part of the world and you actually care. A person from Fiji and a person from Pakistan, you can definitely have very interesting conversations, but you're going to have to lead with very different lines of questioning because
Exactly.
these are two very different places. Just like
Yeah.
if you're talking to a farmer in Midwest America who's struggling with a harvest, maybe you might have to lead with a line of questioning that's about, hey, what is a big struggle for someone who's farming and who's having to navigate changing weather systems and fluctuating prices of goods? Like, you need to have a good rough sense of how different professions or cultures function if you want to ask interesting open-ended questions that gets you further down the path of connecting with someone.
Yeah. And so to wrap it all up, we've talked about the importance of active listening,
Mm,
how that provides the space for people to open up so that you can actually understand
yeah,
what is really going on or what is this really about.
yeah,
Now, how can you show that you are actively listening
mm,
is that A, you want to be able to
yeah,
paraphrase. And then B, you want to ask open-ended questions,
mm,
tactical empathy,
yeah.
ask like, well, how do you feel about that? Or tell me more about this particular thing. And then lastly, as a pro tip, to be an even more elevated active listener, have an arsenal of topics and information, knowledge that you know about different things.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, having that arsenal so that you're more ready to ask these interesting questions when the time comes. But I think ultimately by active listening, you're giving this person this really important space to make the connections about the problem that they're trying to deal with or solve. And by emotionally supporting them and letting them sound themselves out, they are actively constructing the meaning of what it is they're trying to get at. So that's all for today. If you found this really helpful and you are struggling with active listening and you got a lot of value out of this, drop us a comment, let us know. Or if you have your own tips and tricks or insights about active listening and you feel like we didn't really explore them in much depth here, also let us know. So please, again, comments, like, subscribe, and thank you as always for all the support. And we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.